It all started with a man named George.
One of the creative visionaries of our time. Someone who really has this passion for storytelling and has been able to tell stories in completely new ways.
Who created one of the great game companies of all time.
Those games were fun. Those games had attitude.
Don't mess around with me.
Those games were something different in the crowd back then.
But the road isn't always paved with success.
We'd lost a bit of the focus that had made us the kind of company that people really rallied around and were excited about.
And yet they turned some old favorites into amazing adventures.
Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. It really took adventure gaming into yet another dimension.
What we initially really set out to do, which was take the famous battles from the movies, really recreate them 100%.
This is the story behind the one and only LucasArts. In 1977, George Lucas unleashes Star Wars upon the masses. The film is a blockbuster and changes the face of entertainment. 5 years later, George looks to expand into something beyond movie making.
He wanted something that would allow for an interactivity to be brought to either Star Wars properties or original game properties. He had a clear vision about wanting to bring in an interactive element into entertainment.
That something turns out to be the business of making games.
The company was founded when George wanted to get into games, and we had a venture with Atari at the time to produce some games on the Atari VCS console.
The Lucasfilm Games Group is created in 1982, next door to special effects powerhouse Industrial Light and Magic.
We started out developing games in the early days for the Commodore 64, the Amiga, the Atari ST, and then eventually the IBM PC. We diversified from there to the early console games, the 8-bit games, 16 and 32.
When Lucas Games was first founded, actually 2 games were produced, the first being Ballblazer. And the second, Rescue on Fractalus. There's some contention as to which came first, but we'll just leave it at that those were sort of the first 2 games.
By 1987, LucasArts establishes itself as a premier adventure game developer, thanks to hits such as Maniac Mansion and The Secret of Monkey Island, 2 games designed by Ron Gilbert.
Ron was sort of in charge of the design and the story as a whole, and we were helping him sort of flesh it out and brainstorm things, and everybody was contributing puzzle ideas here and there. People like Tim Schafer and myself were responsible for the detail work, where we would take a particular location, write all the scenes that happened there, invent lines for the characters to say when you touch the different objects in the room. There was some programming involved, some blocking of the characters where they're going to walk. Many hats, many hats.
It's such a strange look on the whole concept of pirate characters. I mean, frankly, they were all originally sort of, I'm not speaking out of school here to say, frankly, they were originally inspired by Pirates of the Caribbean, What if we just kind of took the Pirates of the Caribbean world and sort of made it a real environment?
The Secret of Monkey Island puts you in the role of the unstoppable and unlikely hero named Guybrush Threepwood.
Guybrush Threepwood is like you, only less so. He's the ultimate kind of loser with a good heart. He has one goal in life, and just seems like whenever he has a success, it always somehow gets turned into a defeat.
The nebbish pirate character of Guybrush Threepwood, sort of taking this pirate wannabe guy and sort of putting him through his comic paces.
He's a foil for you in that you can guide him and be smarter than him and still revel in his moderate success.
The results are comedy gold. The Secret of Monkey Island wins rave reviews.
One of the hardest things to do in a game is get humor across, because as the game creator, you can't control the pace of the game, and so much humor depends on pacing. And so the fact that the Monkey Island series is just hilarious, like it's just a testament to the skill of the designers. The fact that they actually made this interactive game funny, it was just a stunning achievement. It's awesome.
One year later, Monkey Island 2, LeChuck's Revenge, is released.
Well, trying to recreate the magic was not all that hard. I mean, it was easier, if anything. Okay, do that again, do it better for less money. It was nice, and it was more comfortable working on the sequel, I think, in a way, because we'd already done it once, and we knew that we could, and we knew that the humor felt good, the style that we had gone in was good, and people had responded to it.
And Lucasfilm Games becomes LucasArts.
Lucasfilm Games was a division of Lucasfilm Limited, but we outgrew ourselves. We grew from a band of about 25 individuals to about 100, 150, and at that point in time, we moved off the ranch and established ourselves as a separate company. We were then part of LucasArts Entertainment Company, and we've sort of carried that name. A logo was developed, and that's how the entity was born.
LucasArts adventure games make their mark, but the real adventure begins when they revive an old archaeologist. By the late 1980s, LucasArts is off to a terrific start, thanks to original games such as Ball Blazer and The Secret of Monkey Island. But their next adventure features the one and only
Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, and that was a PC adventure game created by Hal Barwood, who was a film student with Mr. Lucas back at USC.
When I started, we were doing an Indiana Jones game, and it was one of those things which was new. It was the first game LucasArts did that had dialogue, really.
You fool! You come back to show me this prehistoric knick-knack?
Some of the challenges we faced with Indy was how to tell a graphic adventure story around something we'd only seen on film screen, really, at that point.
We must test!
So it was how to project Indiana Jones and his character across a tiny little monitor and make the audience, the player, who was manipulating him, moving him around the world, actually feel like they were being Indiana Jones.
Practically no one on the team at the time had ever built a commercial game and brought it to completion.
Then we have failed!
It was also the first game we did that you could do 256 colors instead of 16.
My God!
And it was all wonderful, but Indy was about 50 pixels tall.
We've done it!
Fate of Atlantis is this great, huge game. It's got the whole 3 paths thing going on, where the story could go down 3 separate paths for long stretches at a time. Unheard of in an adventure game at the time.
It really took adventure gaming into yet another dimension, because for the first time it really evolved the characters that were involved in the graphic adventure, and it evolved the type of story that was very sophisticated as a graphic adventure.
The 1992 release of Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis is a huge success. But while people like Hal Barwood and Tim Schafer are making graphic adventure games, just down the hall they're working on something totally different.
Well, for many years, we really built our reputation as a developer of adventure games. And then we diversified beyond that to a line of flight simulators. Specifically games that were historical flight simulators based upon different arenas of World War II.
LucasArts launches an entire line of flight simulators, helmed by Larry Holland. Battlehawks 1942 is released in 1988, Their Finest Hour in 1989, and Secret Weapons of the Luftwaffe in 1991. The games are a success, but none compare to what comes next.
People started looking at the flight simulator engine and thinking, we could really use this in the Star Wars environment.
under attack by Imperial Star Destroyer. Launch the X-Wing fighter.
X-Wing, based on the Star Wars films, debuts in 1993 and becomes an instant classic.
I can't shake him. I'm on it.
The X-Wing came from Larry Holland, and X-Wing was one of those games which, on the PC back in the early 90s, really opened up intellectual property gaming to the wide market.
I think the technology had to catch up a little bit so that there was a sense of realism when you climbed into the cockpit and flew around in an X-Wing. X-Wing, the series, really accomplished this and really put us on the map in PC games on a level that we had never experienced. It was a leading game, top 10 for over 9 months on the charts.
The success of X-Wing leads to even more Star Wars tie-ins.
And then we followed that up with Rebel Assault, which was our second Star Wars game and our first PC CD-ROM game.
X-Wing gets a sequel called TIE Fighter, and Rebel Assault is followed up with Rebel Assault 2, The Hidden Empire.
They were very different games. One was an action arcade game, one was a flight simulator game. But they did two things for us.
I'm going down!
They put us on the map with PC games that were innovative, things we'd never done before. And then they established Star Wars in the gaming space that had never been established before. We began to move in different directions by offering different games in different genres for the PC. So when we started with early adventure games, we continued to create a line of adventure games and a line of flight simulators. But we moved also to first-person shooters that were emerging as a very popular segment. So we introduced Dark Forces, which was one of the leading first-person shooters of its day.
Meanwhile, LucasArts continues to create great adventure games, such as Sam & Max Hit the Road and Day of the Tentacle, both released in 1993.
Sam & Max gets the absurdity of those characters. They're not wacky like Ren and Stimpy per se. They have a sort of slightly more biting sensibility to them. They make snide comments about the world around them as opposed to just being like other characters.
Day of the Tentacle is a game where you walk onto the set of an old Bugs Bunny cartoon from the 30s, directed by Chuck Jones.
He's got the tentacles tied up in his secret lab. Question is, where's his secret lab?
You take on the role of Bugs, essentially. You're sort of the foil for all the goofy stuff that's going to happen in a cartoon like that. Probably the best thing I've ever done.
Nonsense. Those games were fun. Those games had attitude. Something different in the crowd back then. Tim Schafer and his crew was brilliant and wacky and funny. There weren't that many funny games around, and even today there's not that many funny games around.
We have detonation. In 1995, The Dig.
You see anything unusual?
And Tim Schafer's Full Throttle are launched.
What really drew me into it was just the idea of playing this big biker guy. This was really cool, you know.
Come on, kitty! Let's get down!
Don't think I'll ever get the chance in my life to really run a biker gang and be a leader of a biker gang and to do some of the things that you get to do in that game. But being able to vicariously do it in that environment was a really neat thing.
I fixed your door.
I thought it had a great art style, and it's amazing when you get it running in a modern Windows machine, which can be tricky in of itself.
You know what might look better on your nose? What? The bar.
But you look at it today and go, wow, that really looks great.
I'm not putting my lips on that.
And they had Tim Schafer puzzles, which were, you know, insanely nasty. But that's Tim for you.
Hey, who's that down there in the yard? It's Sam.
Graphic adventures were a big part of the foundation of modern gaming. They've attracted a lot of people into gaming that were previously alienated. Humor appealed to a wide audience.
But isn't that illegal?
Not back then, it wasn't.
Sales reach millions of dollars thanks to the success of more Star Wars titles, such as Star Wars Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 and Rebel Assault 2. But soon, sales drop, and the gaming giant begins to sweat. After the 1995 release of Full Throttle, LucasArts is riding high, but the next few years see a decline in sales. Tim Schafer works his magic again with The Curse of Monkey Island in 1997 and Grim Fandango in 1998. Ta-da! But while the reviews are ecstatic, the sales are disappointing.
Pumped another one. Lousy, bony fingers.
And the adventure game market has always been this niche market where you can depend on N number of people, but getting that to 5 times N is, really difficult.
The quality of our games had fallen off a bit. And I think we'd lost a bit of the focus that had made us the kind of company that people really rally around and were excited about.
Knockout. Darth Vader, win.
Just like everybody else that's around my age, we grew up loving Star Wars, and Star Wars is what kind of defined our childhood, and there were so many games that just weren't very good.
I have a bad feeling about this.
You kind of got to experience it, but there was nothing that really kind of captured it. Maybe it's technology's fault. Maybe Star Wars was so ahead of the curve that, video games could never really capture the essence of Star Wars.
Find a way to open this door, and hurry!
Star Wars fans absolutely want to see games that feel real to them, that really feel part of the Star Wars universe. And if there's any disconnect, then we've found that they don't buy them.
After Star Wars Episode 1 is released in 1999, a slew of games based on the new prequel are released, including Episode 1 Racer and Obi-Wan. But very few are as successful as LucasArts' previous games. To get their games back on track, LucasArts makes some key changes.
One of the strategic directions that we went in was to re-inject that quality back into our games to meet the kinds of expectations that people had built up in the previous years. And one of the ways to do that was to partner with some of the premier third-party developers that had great technology and had a proven track record of developing top-notch games in specific genres.
Like Factor 5, the team behind the hugely successful Star Wars Rogue Squadron.
We always had pitched for a number of years that we wanted to create our own Star Wars title, and we always said, let's do it more based on the old movies, please, please, please. And let's find a way to do the flight combat, which Larry Holland did so well in his X-Wing PC games, a completely different take on a console, and that became Rogue Squadron. And I think everybody was a little bit surprised how successful it was.
The plan pays off. And games such as Rogue Squadron 2, Rogue Leader, released in 2001, and Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast, released in 2002 from Raven Software, bring the company back up to pace.
Rogue Leader for the GameCube was the second one in the series, and that was what we initially really set out to do.
There's too many of them.
Which was take the famous battles from the movies, really recreate them 100%.
In late 2003, more releases are well received by fans.
Star Wars Galaxies is set against the backdrop of this galactic civil war. We have hundreds of little subplots running through the game. Everything from the really silly and almost sublime all the way up to things that are very closely tied to the serious conflict of the galactic civil war.
So now Rogue Squadron 3, Rebel Strike, is along the same lines of fantasy fulfillment from the movies. You've got character sequences with Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia. You've got the famous Dune Sea battle in the Sarlacc pit. You've got walkers in the forest, so you've got the forest battle with the Ewoks running around. And of course we also have our classic flight combat in there. So it's really taking the 3 classic Star Wars movies and doing everything in a video game fashion.
Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic is a third-person role-playing game set in the Star Wars universe about 4,000 years before the time of the movies. And the freedom to create a really new and unique story where huge, incredible vehicles are built that no one's ever heard of. And one of the key things about this game is that you can actually play dark or light side. You can actually be the hero and save the Republic, or you can be the ultimate villain in the galaxy and be pure evil by the time you end the game.
We're building several adventures. We're reinvesting in Full Throttle.
That's going to have more action sequences, but still be kind of an epic story. I'm doing the new Sam & Max game.
We have a role-playing game called Gladius coming out. So there's a lot of stuff that people don't expect to come from LucasArts that's in the pipeline right now.
Every game is set in the stars, thanks to the guiding hand of George Lucas.
George is very interested in everything we're doing, especially as his kids are getting into games. He likes to look at everything we do. We generally run all of our ideas into him, and he'll come back with ideas. So he's quite proactive.
When there is an issue, then it kind of goes all the way up the flagpole, and George approves that. We also sit down and talk to him about some of the designs of our major titles.
We as a company take our vision and our cue for creative quality from Mr. Lucas's inspiration.
It's truly inspirational working with someone who is one of the creative visionaries of our time.